Hello, I am Julian Tomjo from the Department of Journalism. Today we will be learning about the impact of Oxford movement and Cardinal John Henry Newman. You know, during the 19th century, to be exact, from the 1833s or the 1840s, there was a movement in the British Anglican Church. There was high church Anglicans such as John Henry Newman, John Keble, and Edward Bouverie Pusey led a movement named the Oxford Movement due to their presence in the Oxford University because they wanted the Anglican Church to trace back to its roots. And the important thing is that the roots which they are searching back will begin at the Catholic Church, right? So during the 19th century in England, the Anglicans and the Catholics were in a state of constant strife, right? So the Anglicans never accepted the Catholics who had their authority in Rome, that is the Pope. They never accepted the papal authority. And for them, the Pope was an agent of the devil. And in Britain, this struggle was very prevalent. When it comes to Ireland, they were mostly or 99% Catholic, and the rest of the Great Britain, they were Anglicans. And their political struggle had a tinge of religion also. So, the Catholics of Ireland and the Anglicans of Great Britain were in a state of political tension and also a religious tension. And in the Great Britain, uh, I mean in England, the Catholics who were staying there, they were against the king, the Anglican Church, and the Parliament. And there was a plot like the Gunpowder Plot, where the Catholics tried to bomb the British Parliament. So the British Parliament and the British people, and the majority of the British people were against the were against the Catholics, and they were against the Catholics, and the Catholics were against the Anglicans or the Anglican authority. And on this background, that we have to discuss about the Victorian movement, that is the Oxford movement, and Cardinal John Henry Newman. All right. So the Oxford movement was a movement of high church Anglicans in the 19th century, led by John Henry Newman. It sought to return the Church of England to its Catholic roots and to re-establish the ancient doctrines of the church. So, as I said, in England there was a strife between the Anglicans and the Catholics, and John Henry Newman and Edward Bouverie Pusey, who published the magazine Tracts for Times, which was first published in 1833, and Tracts for Times was very influential in the Oxford movement. And the Oxford movement, the people who belonged to the Oxford movement were called Tractarians due to the influence of Tracts for Times, and it was published by Edward Bouverie Pusey, right? So, and all these all these people of the Oxford movement wanted was that they wanted to return to the Catholic roots. And this movement was based in Oxford University, and this was an intellectual movement too. And uh, well, the Oxford University was at a state of paucity during that time, and these high church Anglicans who wanted to return to the Catholic roots also wanted to revive the intellectualism of the Oxford University. So it has a significance in that manner also. It tried to revive the Catholic traditions in the Anglican Church, and also it tried to revive the Oxford University as a center of excellence, as a center of intellectualism, as a center of research, etc. Right. So this is Cardinal John Henry Newman, and you can see that he is in his Catholic vestments. He converted to Catholicism in 1845, and he was promoted to the position of a cardinal in 1879. You can see that in this picture he is in his Catholic vestments. So he was a high church Anglican. He was an Anglican church father who sought to revive the Catholic traditions, and that movement is known as the Oxford movement. But the Oxford movement later transformed, and there was a split between in the Oxford movement people, and one section which was led by Cardinal John Henry Newman. He was not cardinal at that time, John Henry Newman, and these people reconverted to Catholicism. And the other section, led by Edward Boer stayed inside the Anglican Church itself, and it changed the Anglican Church standards, the Anglican Church practices, etc. Right. So John Henry Newman was a leader in the Oxford movement and was later made a cardinal of the Catholic Church. So he was rewarded by the Catholic Church for converting to Catholicism. Right. He was a high church Anglican, and during this time of strife between the Anglicans and Catholics, he went back to his original faith. We can say in such a way, because Anglican Church separated from the Catholic Church due to the influence of Henry VIII during the 17th century on basically a very personal premise. Henry VIII had a problem with his divorce, and the Pope didn't accept it. The Pope at Rome didn't accept it, and Henry VIII separated the Church of England from the Catholic Church. So the Anglican Church father John Henry Newman went back to the original faith that the Anglicans had, which was Catholicism. Right. He was a prolific writer and a theologian. He was also a prolific writer, and his works have had a lasting impact on the Church of England and the Catholic Church also. So his works primarily were meant for the Anglicans, and later his works also influenced the Catholics. Right. His most famous works include Apologia Pro Vita Sua, The Idea of a University, an essay on the development of Christian doctrine. Alright, these were the works by Cardinal John Henry Newman: Apologia Pro Vita Sua, The Idea of a University, and an essay on the development of Christian doctrine. So the main points regarding the Oxford movement. It was rooted in a deep reverence for the Church Fathers, and the early Christian tradition emphasized the continuity of Church of England with the historic Catholic Church. So when we are going back to tradition, the older forms of faith should be followed, and it had happened with the Oxford movement too. So the Church Fathers for them were obviously Catholic, as they were separated from the Catholic Church. So when the movement tried to revive the traditions, it automatically revived the Catholic spirit in the Anglican Church. Right. The movement was highly controversial and led to a split within the Church of England, with some embracing its ideas and others opposing them. And as I said earlier, a section led by John Henry Newman separated from the Anglican Church, and they went back to Catholicism. The Oxford movement led to a renewed emphasis on the Catholic doctrines of the Church and a greater emphasis on liturgy and rituals. So, as the Anglican Church was fairly new when it comes to Christian tradition, the liturgy they followed, the rites they followed, were substantially low in quality when compared to the Catholic faith. Oxford movement led to the renewed use of all these, the vestments, the rites, the liturgy, etc. of the Catholic faith into the Anglican Church. Right. The Oxford movement also led to the formation of the Anglican Communion. Okay, this is also another feature of the Oxford movement. It led to the formation of the Anglican Communion, a worldwide organization of churches in communion with the Church of England. So it led to a communion, or like the Catholic Church, which is a collection of churches all over the globe. The Anglican Communion was formed after the Oxford movement. So what was the Anglican Communion? There were churches which was formed by Anglican missionaries all over the world. When it comes to India, you have the Church of South India, or CSI Church, which was rooted in Anglican traditions. And the Oxford movement led to the formation of the Anglican Communion, and all these churches, like the Church of South India, was part of a union of churches belonging to the Anglican faith, or which had Anglican roots. Right. It also inspired the formation of the Catholic Apostolic Church and the Catholic Charismatic movement. Okay, so the Oxford movement had significance for the Catholic Church also, and it led to the formation of the Catholic Apostolic Church. and the Catholic charismatic movement, which is still prevalent today, the Catholic charismatic movement, and the Catholic Apostolic Church, and there was a revived evangelism in the Catholic Church as a result of the Oxford movement. Okay, let us analyze the chronology of the Oxford movement. The Oxford movement began in the 1830s and continued in the 1840s and 1850s. So, we can say the beginning of the Oxford movement started with the publication of Tracts for Times, which was initially published in the 1833s. So, it was a very lengthy movement which almost took 3 decades. So, it went through 1840s and through 1850s. Okay, its early leaders. So these were the proponents of the Oxford movement. Its early leaders included John Keble, John Henry Newman, who later converted to Catholic faith, and Edward Bouverie Poussey, who published a series of tracts outlining their beliefs. Okay, he published the Tracts for Times. Who? Edward Bouverie Poussey. Right. In 1845, Cardinal Newman or John Henry Newman converted to Roman Catholicism, leading to a schism. Okay, there was a split within the Anglican Church, a schism within the movement. Despite this, the ideas of the Oxford movement continue to influence the Church of England and Anglicanism more broadly. So, even though Cardinal Newman and a section of Anglican broke up with the Anglican Church, the movement had significance for the Anglican Church, and it later on influenced the Anglican Church, and it revived certain traditions in the Anglican Church which was rooted in Catholic tradition, right? So key personalities who belongs to the Anglican movement. John Keble, 1792 to 1866, was a theologian and poet who published the first Oxford Movement's Tracts for Times in 1833. He published the first Oxford Movement's Tracts for Time, John Keble. Okay. John Henry Newman, 1801 to 1819, was a prominent Anglican theologian and a priest who converted to Roman Catholicism in 1845 and becoming a cardinal in 1879. So, John Henry Newman was elevated to the position of a cardinal in 1879. Edward Bouverie Poussey, 1800 to 1882, was a theologian and priest who was a close friend and collaborator of Newman and a leading figure in the Oxford movement. So, these three people are the key figures in the Oxford movement. So, thank you. That was the Oxford movement and its influence in the Victorian society.